Well, good morning, everybody. First thing I'm going to talk about is just the weekend rainfall. This map is looking back at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precipitation, and for many, the precipitation that came through via these thunderstorms this past weekend was absolutely critical to the success of the 2023 growing season. I'm specifically thinking about these places here in parts of the Corn Belt like Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, that just saw a tremendous amount of rain coming through. And some of this came after what had been several weeks of very dry weather. And this is the kind of moisture that goes through and recharges pretty deep given how much the fields have been worked over here lately. Now, we're not done just yet, and just to let you know, this precipitation, the heavy stuff, even made it way back here into the northwest. In fact, many places in Montana that have been quite dry picked up a lot of precipitation as well. Unfortunately, with some of this, we did have some tornado reports and also a lot of hail. I just want to show you the last 3 days of hail reports here. So the color represents the maximum estimated hail size, so you can use the color barber here to kind of see what we're looking at. But coming out of the western Corn Belt into the mid-Mississippi River Valley, and then, of course, down into Texas. This was a weekend where there was just, I saw numerous pictures of just baseball-size hail, some up to softball size, and it was doing a lot of damage in a lot of places. So I just wanted to show you here what we've got in terms of hail reports this past weekend. Now, while all of this is going on in the States, all of this thunderstorm activity, we did notice that in Canada, there were some very large fires that broke out this weekend. So on May the 5th, got a good view here from NOAA's VERS satellite, and you can see just the extent of the smoke here in Alberta. And then on the 6th, we can continue to see them. This would have been, of course, Saturday, just looking at the smoke getting pulled here into British Columbia. Right now, due to cloud cover and better chances of precipitation in Alberta, the Canadian Weather Service has reduced the risk of fires here in Alberta, but notice here in Saskatchewan, they're quite high. Now let's come back to the U.S. and take a look at our latest satellite data as the sun was rising this morning. There's a pretty large complex of storms that's moving through Missouri and Illinois. And if we just take this back, though, to yesterday, I want to show you just the size of these storms. So it's kind of just amazing to see how quickly we broke into summertime convection mode farther to the north. And this has been an area that for most of April was quite cold. And while we had a bunch of severe weather at the end of March in this region, seeing convection like this just showing up is really kind of indicative of what this pattern is up to. Now, there's a lot of just amazing things to pull out of this animation and have a look at. But I'm going to take you down here to the southern plains because Kansas was a state that was missed, and so was parts of Oklahoma. But it was interesting to see what was coming out of the backside of this complex of storms here in Texas. And I'm looking specifically right here, and it appears that the outflow from some of these storms kicked up quite a bit of dust into this area. And I just wanted to point that out to you here on satellite, just something kind of fascinating to look at least a lot of haze in the atmosphere in this area. Okay, bigger picture, moisture. This is where we sit right now through this morning, according to NASA's modeled soil moisture data. And we continue to watch an area shrink, but just notice parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, although moisture did hit some of these areas, it's not enough to correct these kind of longer standing problems, which means this upcoming forecast is critical. I got asked in the comments by a viewer, said, hey, can you pull up last October's soil moisture map? And I just want to show it to you. This is what it looked like. So this is where we were on Halloween last year. All right. From here, the pattern is still very conducive to more storms. And what I'm talking about is broad troughing over the west, southwest flow coming across the United States. That was a main theme for the last probably 10 videos or so. And what we are expecting out of this is just open Gulf moisture to come up just like this, which is why we expect to see quite a bit of storm activity into the midsection of the country. What we're going to be watching for is anything to cut off that moisture and to kind of switch the pattern around. So let's go back to our precipitable water map that tells us just how much juice is in the atmosphere to fuel these storms. And remember, the higher you go up in this color bar, the more moisture there is. So as I play forward through the day on Monday, just going through this week, you're just watching to see how far to the north this kind of moisture plume from the Gulf of Mexico makes it and how far to the west as well. As we just play it out, we see that moisture is returning to the west. In fact, much of late this week, getting into the weekend, and early next week, Texas is going to have what could be a pretty wide-scale flood event coming through. And some of this moisture is going to make it into Kansas and Oklahoma, but we're still going to watch for storms throughout the Mid-South, even here in parts of the western Corn Belt and the northern plains. When I see this finally changing up, may not be until around the 15th or 16th. We kind of have some cooler but mainly drier air that's coming in. You can see it right in through here, kind of pushing this south. And that's, again, what we expected, right? We talked about how this pattern set up kind of week on, week off. So we've got about 7 or 8 days now of where we're going to see more storms like this until the pattern makes a bit of a shift. And we're going to go back over to a little bit of a drier time period in the middle of the month. But until then, and this is the 0Z forecast from the WPC, looking at total accumulated precipitation through the next 7 days. There are some places that are getting this right now, okay, like the big line of storms that's coming through Illinois. But notice down here in Texas, we have the forecast from the National Weather Service showing that south central Texas is possibly up here in this 5 to 7 inch range over the next 7 days. Now we'll look at who's not getting this precipitation, because the map, when you stare at it, you're like, wow, looks like everybody. But look at this corridor and through here. Check out the southeast and parts of New England, around the Great Lakes and through here. And then this, of course, into the mountains. We don't expect, given this setup, to deliver a lot of moisture into the mountains. There will be isolated convection in them, of course, but this is just not going to show up well in this kind of forecast map. So where are the storms this morning? This is some of the latest lightning data kind of rolling through. So active through Illinois and Missouri, down here to parts of Kentucky, Tennessee. It's even a complex of storms up here in northern parts of Minnesota. And as we just take a look here at the radar, just go back to yesterday. Look at these storms just popping everywhere on this, on the heat and on the available moisture. But as we talked about, these storms are not being driven by large-scale features like strong fronts. So that is why there are some people that through this entire weekend, while it felt like everyone else was getting rain, because of the way that the storms produce their own outflow, which drives the development of new storms, there are some places that were just missed by this. And unfortunately, we need to see that, we need to see that discontinue. But unfortunately, this weekend, there's a lot of folks that are probably going to have coffee this morning saying, how much did you get? And they're part of the conversation is we were robbed. So let's go out and take a look at where we have the severe weather threat today. So this is on the 8th. That line of storms coming through Illinois. We're going to keep an eye right in through this area and down into Texas. Going into tomorrow on the 9th, again, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and over here in the Carolinas. And then as we get into the 10th, we're going to watch the high plains set up here, the western high plains in Colorado, and this side of Kansas. This is desperately needed moisture in this area should it come through. All right, high-res model first. This is the NAM from this morning. We're going to start it at 7 a.m. Model was pretty well initialized, although the storms right now are much farther ahead of this. So we have to understand that the model was not perfectly initialized with the position of these storms this morning. So they're a bit late in the model. But we can watch as we play through the day on Monday just where these complex of storms are expected to pop. But understand that the model is not going to be capturing this very well because of a poor initialization. We go out there into Tuesday, and we just continue to see the storms moving through parts of the Mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas. And then we continue to see as this low, watch it, I kind of felt like I left California out of the earlier discussion, but you see this low coming in here to California. This one's going to spin through Oregon, Idaho, spreading storms to its north, getting into Montana. And that's just going to sit there and spin. Out ahead of it, from the plains east, just complexes of storms are rolling through. All right? Okay, bigger picture. Next 10 days, this is the probability of getting another inch of total accumulated precipitation based off the 0Z ECMWF ensemble run. A lot of this just came through because remember, the 0Z run starts late last night. So there's moisture that already came through here. Here's the probability of 2 inches and the probability of 4. And now we're talking about Texas really being an area that gets hammered with precipitation. I want to point out, though, that right now, model performance has made a pretty big drop. Both the European model and the GFS, which is way down here, their ability to match the upper level height pattern has dropped off pretty badly. So this might just be because of a transition to more subtle features. This might be to this one large blocking ridge and maybe trying to assess its height that's going up into parts of Western Canada. But I have to look into this more today to understand why model performance really backed off this weekend. But given that, we do need to compare our models and see what we've got. So we're going to play through starting here with the 0Z runs, GFS left, European right. As we walk through this, you're just going to see complexes of storms east. You'll see that low we just talked about coming through California into Oregon and eventually Montana. But there's just going to be this constant pull on moisture. And as we get through the week here, you're just going to see that moisture moving through the central United States with repeated rounds of storms, especially this weekend, coming into Texas. It'll be another week that we will spend our day nowcasting. We're going to see where the storms evolve and watch how they progress forward. You're not going to be happy with model performance this week. There's going to be a lot of kind of misguidance with the models. So what we're looking for are the broader features here to understand how this pattern is opening up to the way the moisture can move through. Now, the models really diverge out there past about a week, and therefore we're not going to rely much on what they're suggesting out that far. But again, we kind of can distill this down into this map. This map. This is the one I want to think about. From here, let's go out and look at what the pattern's going to look like by the time we get into this weekend. The ridge I was questioning is this one here. This trough pulls out farther into the Gulf of Alaska, away from the west coast, and a large ridge builds here, and we're getting some suggestions of a high over a low setup. Now, what this does is in spring, which we're still in spring despite what some of these temperatures feel like, you end up getting northwest flow into this section of the country. That starts to dry things out. But with the trough down here, this just keeps pulling moisture up to the south of this. So what we end up getting out of this pattern is a lot of heat underneath the ridge, very wet conditions from the Four Corner states through Texas all the way along the Gulf Coast, but a drier signal here. Now, in about a month, when you hear me say northwest flow coming through the Canadian Prairie, Northern Plains, Corn Belt, that is a flow pattern that delivers thunderstorms, but we're not quite there just yet. But if we look out there into the week 2 forecast, see how it's drier, but wetter Four Corner states, Texas to the southeast. European model has the same pattern, so does the GFS. That's what we get right now, given the setup with the flow. But that big ridge building into the west is going to bring temperatures way up as we get into this upcoming weekend. So let's talk about temperatures as we start to wrap this one up. All right, frost potential over the next 7 days. Mainly confined to New England tomorrow morning and again on Wednesday morning, and then higher elevation in the west. Now somebody's watching this going, what the heck is happening in Iowa? This is not a frost event. I went and looked at this morning. Something happened with the National Digital Forecast Database and they put in the wrong data here. So they have like a super, super cold temperature for one spot, and that's what's going on. So no frost here, don't worry. But let's take a look at what the high temperatures are going to be doing. So here's today's highs. We play into tomorrow. Remember, there's that cooler shot of air coming into New England, but a lot of summer-like warmth in the midsection of the country. The colder conditions in parts of the southwest, they have an expiration date. We're going to see that warm up here pretty soon, but a lot of almost summer-like heat pouring in here, early summer-like heat this week. This is Friday's temperatures getting into Saturday and Sunday. Now look, this weekend, this is when that big ridge builds and there's a cutoff low here. So all of this heat wrapping around this ridge in the northwest, but the delivery of the moisture in the clouds down into Texas in the Four Corner states. Now let's go out here and have a look real quick at what's going on with the kind of the longer term temperature pattern. This is a 5-day sliding window of average temperatures. Let's take you out there to day 5 through 10 when that ridge is really established. So a lot of heat here. We're going to increase our evaporation rates, really start to bring in that fire threat again to this part of Canada. Where it's cooler, this is all cloud cover driven and moisture driven. As we play this out beyond this, though, remember there's northwest flow coming into the pattern. So what do we end up getting in spring? You can see that ridging here, northwest flow there. It just gives you a cooler shot of air. This is not a frost event. This is just cooler air coming into this region, a few degrees cooler than average. All right, tonight, some of the big things we're going to be talking about. We have new data, long-range forecast data came out this week, and I spent a lot of time thinking it through. We're going to talk about the PDO versus what's going on here with the El Nino. We're also going to talk about these ocean temperatures in the North Atlantic, which are going to be critical to the forecast as well. But here's one of the big things. The latest data from the European model remains quite aggressive. If you look at the ensemble average for ocean temperatures in the middle of the equatorial Pacific, it's going to hit 2C according to the European model. That is right here. So a lot of warming is expected to occur there. And the models just continue to show that warmer water dominating the pattern in the Pacific. The question will be the fade of the PDO. Will it happen as the models are advertising? That's going to be the big question. So if we take a look at what the model's forecasting now for summer, we continue to see a lot of moisture being forecast for parts of the plains in through here, the Midwest, getting into the Ohio River Valley. But in tonight's video, we'll talk a bit about why the models are coming up with a bit of drier forecast here. Drier in the north, coming up to parts of the Great Lakes. And then we'll watch what might happen with the southwestern monsoon in the models and where we expect the heat to set up. So we'll cover all of that in tonight's in-depth report. Finally, just want to bring up to speed on South America. Models really went aggressively drier. This is playing out through the next 10 days. There's a lot of places that are expected to receive no precipitation where we grow a lot of crops in through here. This could be an impact on the safrinha crop down south in southern Brazil. We'll watch that carefully. But Argentina going into this fall, very, very dry. All right, we'll wrap up this forecast video here, and we'll talk to you again tonight. Thanks.